Thunderbolts is top class. It's the kind of Marvel movie that meets the expectations for a good, don't break the formula modern superhero movie, while introducing enough elements that make it unique in its own right. What I personally noticed is that the movie doesn't patronize the audience. It knows its characters, and doesn't treat anyone like they're fresh out of an iceberg squeaky clean of any loose ends and consequences from previous appearances. Except for one. We may know Valentina is the real antagonist here, and her trickiness pairs well against a bunch of essentially reformed criminals, but if the movie was to really centralize all its ideas, themes, and subtext onto one character, it'd be the one and only Bob.
Void.
The Sentry. I'm focusing primarily on this guy's appearance from the movie itself. Comic book allusions will be used, but they won't take precedence. So, who is Bob? Behind the, or rather stood before us with the void looming somewhere in the back, is a young man with amnesia as a result of Valentina's Ox Group's experiments. He's incredibly unremarkable, friendly, and docile. That last part is especially in effect throughout the entire movie. Really, Bob doesn't do much. He really has no motives other than to keep to himself and, when escaping from a death trap, help his new allies survive. We see this kind of simple-mindedness even when he eventually suits up himself in complete actualization of his purposeful existence as the literal superhero Sentry, made to protect the Earth after the Avengers disbanded and scattered to their own pursuits. The Sentry is the ideal superhero. Bright and shiny, symbolic of a new world filled with hope and light, is what they would have you believe. No, Bob harbors some awful demons inside of him, and his unknown history and erratic behavior is what really makes his very presence so uncertain to everybody. He does end up being an incredibly overpowered fixture in the film once the Void comes out because, well, who's gonna check him? Anyone got Thor on call? Didn't think so. As the movie goes on, we expect Sentry to join the good guys. I mean, that's practically telegraphed in the greater MCU. So how does this antagonist swap over to the good guys? And how does it play out in a way that is respectful to the movie's narrative? Now, Bob and the Void could only work with the right dynamic involved. In Guardians 3, Adam Warlock was effective as an antagonist turned hero because, compared to other antagonists, he's actually not that old or has had much experience. This is Warlock before he would become a paragon of all that is good and virtuous in the universe, so it makes sense that he acts less like created perfection and more like a brute-minded crusader. Against the Avengers, Warlock would look like a tool, but against the Guardians, Warlock feels like a legitimate threat. This is someone Star-Lord can't talk his way out of, nor is it someone that they can hope to match in combat without a lot of luck. But there's also a lot of leverage that the High Evolutionary has over Adam. He's just as powerful, if not more so, than Adam Warlock. At least this version, and he's far more intelligent. Where this dynamic fits into Bob and the Thunderbolts is a mixture. Bob, though being incredibly powerful, has little to no knowledge of the complexities of his situation, compared to the gritty Thunderbolts and the manipulative Valentina. Holy crap, word flow. As a result, both sides display a tug-of-war over the Sentry, as he more or less goes with the flow, listening to a bit of everything from everyone. And it's a good narrative thing that he has little to no memory recall. But for the most part, he's treated as a product, much akin to most of the other characters, because the whole movie hinges on this concept for all of its characters. What kind of secrets are you keeping, and how have they affected you? We see that across the main cast, with Valentina's desperate gamble to retain her public image, Ghost's frantic existence due to molecular instability, Bucky, who is trying his best to be a congressman and do things the right way, Walker, who is left out to dry as a failed Captain America, and Yelena and Guardians' shared disillusionment and isolation as abandoned soldiers. Besides Valentina, all of these characters are, or have been, drifters. It adds to a severe weakness that Bob has. He literally cannot afford to trust anyone, not after everything he's been through, not once the void surfaces.
Bob. If only they knew.
Robert Reynolds is not a superhero. He's a human being. And like all human beings, like even the Thunderbolts, he wants to make something of himself, even if he has little to nothing to really give. At least, that's what he believes. Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So saith the ancient proverb. Give Bob here even the slightest semblance of purpose and hope, and he'll dive off the edge. Quite literally. Robert Reynolds is not a superhero, but he's not a monster either. The nightmarish manifestation of his mind, while antagonistic, is really just his inner dialogue magnified and given unholy life because of his mental anguish and experimentation with superhero serums. And even that's just simplifying the existence of the Void. In the comics, the Void is such an awful threat that he had key heroes like Reed Richards and Doctor Strange to not only confront the Void, but also erase all memory of him from public knowledge. But really, this is indicative of the power that this mental dark side holds over Bob. And in the movie, it stretches to the point that it casts a literal shadow over New York City, enveloping those it catches into a shadow realm, not that kind, a shadow realm where their darkest memories haunt them in a perpetual, visceral recall. In hindsight, this is quite on the nose. But remember how the Void and Bob fit into the movie, especially because of its protagonists? We already saw an adjacent visual of when the Avengers had their memories messed with back in Age of Ultron, but those were false visualizations of memories from typically good people. At the very least, people trying to do the right thing, with the right intention, even if, in method, it doesn't look that way. Here, it's not about intention. These rooms, as Bob names them, are solely about what happened to you. We know Yelena's room involved a bait and switch during her childhood. If you look closely from where Bucky entered, it's the area where he was brainwashed, stripped of all agency and functionality of his own being, and molded into a weapon at the click of someone else's intention. I can only theorize what the other rooms were. Perhaps Walker is seeing his brother-in-arms die again, as well as his reputation shattering because of his unbridled rage. Ghost is probably stuck in an intangible hell where feeling is limited to, as she says, a handmade metal cage. It's language like that, mannerisms like this, and retrospective understanding of histories such as these that truly highlight how effective the Void is in contrast to the protagonists, as well as helping us to understand at a fundamental level what our protagonists are. Criminals, drifting from one place to another because of a bad reputation. Whether or not said reputation actually befits who they are, it doesn't matter. They more or less act the way they do because of their stained histories. Bucky is the one exception here, as he's effectively redeemed himself by the end of Falcon and Winter Soldier. Bucky also provides the Thunderbolts enough of that hope and light through grit and effort to help push them onwards. Because these kinds of burdens weigh heavily on the Thunderbolts, and the only one that can really understand that is Bob. But at the same time, Bob doesn't feel that way about himself. Even as Sentry, he's far too impressionable to have a healthy self-conviction, and he's too new to his own powers or even a sense of purpose beyond basic survival that his test run feels like a massive slap to the face of the audience, just as much as it is to the Thunderbolts. Because this guy is one bad punch away from really showing who's actually in control. And just as quickly as he dispatches his fellow Thunderbolts at the order of Valentina, he turns on her when she shows just a hint of betrayal. Bob is terrified of himself, but there is a quiet stillness he has in knowing that the Void is inside of him. Now, he goes through these bouts where he just forgets what has happened. His amnesia is directly connected to whenever the Void comes out. Because of this, Bob is effectively resigned to this fate. He knows he's not stable enough to maintain his sentry side, and the void is perpetually calling to him, nagging constantly with what I would assume are thoughts, questions, and mental jabs at who Bob is. Because what happens when the monster is yourself? Robert Reynolds is not a superhero. He's a human being. Unfortunately, trauma treats both with equal force. It goes without saying that the running thread between all of our characters are defining moments, specifically traumatic defining moments. This is especially effective in the context of Thunderbolts, because knowing the backstory is standard fare for superheroes. Thor was sent to Earth, learned how to be a god, lost his brother twice, and Asgard. Steve was literally taken out of time into a new world, seeing old faces resurface as antagonists and finding himself at odds with the nation he once proudly defended. And literally all of the Infinity Saga is Tony out to prove something, whether it's that he's right, whether his fears are valid, or even whether or not it was worth risking his life to save everyone. However, these guys have a lot more going for them than the Thunderbolts. They have friends, resources, superpowers even. These guys, they have nothing. And when they have nothing to lose, they prove themselves to be one thing: human, vulnerable, frail, weak. Everything the movie has highlighted, as I've aforementioned, is in similitude of Bob's entire character. Because even though they're drifters, the Thunderbolts still have something going for them. Walker's a soldier, Ghost has something to stabilize her, Bucky's a congressman, Guardian has a job and a daughter, and Yelena, well, she has hope, however minuscule. Bob has nothing, and believes he is nothing. When you grow up constantly on the edge of fight or flight and seeing home itself as unsafe, you're not going to become a stable person. You won't trust anything. You won't trust people. You won't trust yourself. Bob exhibits these traits. It's why he took drugs. Not to fix himself, but for himself to get a fix. Some measure of stability in a life that's literally been tossed around. But drugs or any measure of a fix don't provide permanent relief, just a temporary window of things are okay. Or maybe not when it comes to the chicken. But things like drugs are used as coping mechanisms. It may seem helpful for stabilizing one's mental health in the face of stress and challenge, but ultimately, over-reliance on it only hides away the pain and limits one's ability to do and choose, not fully accepting or resolving pain or stress in a healthy way. Bob has effectively sandboxed himself out of an instinctual need to survive and feel safe, even if the side effects continue to plague his ability to function. Combine this with a supposed miracle serum and things become empty. This being made up of hollow but dangerous thoughts and feelings. They're not threatening in a conventional sense. They're more like a plague that slowly infect, corrode, and suffocate, suppressing all thought and feeling besides those that continually haunt every fiber of someone's well-being. Bob knows this. The final act of Thunderbolts alone is just him coming to terms with himself, sheltered inside a messy attic with only windows of his memories for him to peer through. Constant reminders of all the defining moments of his life, none of which are good. And his complete inexperience and lack of confidence in himself only fuels that same monster that haunts him. For inside his worst room is that void, the living emptiness, where love and compassion could have filled. Instead, rage, frustration, and hopelessness have literally carved a hole inside of Bob, a gnawing gap of darkness that he can't even fight. Yes, he does fight, when his allies, who helped him navigate through his other terrible memories, urged him to help them after the Void threatens to kill them. But, you see, unlike other heroes or villains in the MCU who may have had a say in the terrible things they might enact on others, Bob doesn't have a say. And the nature of the Void is too immediately dangerous for someone to run an analysis on what it wants. If there is one thing the Void wants, it's for Bob
To join him.
so even as Bob attempts to beat the literal hell out of the Void, it just starts consuming him. His own ability to resist is suffocated by hatred and fear, the only motives he's known when it comes to understanding how to deal with people. Fortunately, the Void doesn't get what it wants, because even though they're objectively not the best people, the Thunderbolts recognize something in Bob, a survivor. And survivors, while they might be able to do it on their own, have always found something worth more than just fighting when people begin to believe in them.
I don't want to think of it anymore, but I don't want to be alone either.
I think it goes without saying that Sentry was never meant to be your golden shiny hero, because his character has always been a parable for mental health and its effects. And planting these ideas in a superhero is somewhat tricky. You don't want to glamorize mental health, but you do want to shed a light on it. Underneath the cape and the golden eyes is a human soul, steeped in pain and broken like clay. I feel it's especially difficult for Bob because, with such great powers and such great expectations, it challenges who he is. Heck, he doesn't even know himself what he is. He could try and conform to what society expects of him as a superhero, but even he knows that it just takes one bad trip to summon the other guy once more. And I believe that is what his story arc is about. What it means to harbor such a dark stain in our very minds, and how we can even attempt to move on without being consumed by it. And all of this is without taking a significant micro-study on every event that's affected Robert Reynolds, just from the movie alone. Like how his neglected experience as a child fueled an erratic fight-or-flight pattern in him, or how drug abuse likely created a divide between his emotional needs and an addiction to feeling good and stable. Or how having nothing to truly work for has left him without a sense of purpose. Or how, even if I follow Erik Erikson's theory of development, Bob was severely malnourished in all things emotional, social, and intellectual that could make him even a fraction of a functional human being, legitimately stunted at every stage of his life. Or how his isolation and hopelessness has literally manifested a dark half that could break the world in two. Depression and other mental disorders as portrayed in this movie severely undercut anyone who experiences them. It's rather on the nose for Bob's own mental anguish to be portrayed as a literal void person, but, well, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I believe one of the greatest reasons why Thunderbolts was so effective with its portrayal of Sentry is because they gave us the most visceral, unapologetic portrayal of a broken man. It uses the rest of the cast to give us that gritty hope that all of these people can find some measure of purpose or atonement for all the terrible things they've done or has happened to them, by choice or by circumstance. And I do find it tasteful but also realistic that while the Thunderbolts did free Bob from the Void, it didn't defeat the creature. He's still there. Bob still has amnesia. And the Thunderbolts don't know exactly what's going to happen again if the Void comes out. But it is that certainty of their presence, people who do their best to care for and watch Bob, that leaves us with that hope that things can and will get better. And I think that's true for all of us. Sometimes our worst pains will linger, in memory, in body, even in action. But just as there is the certainty of bad days, bad experiences, or bad memories, there are good ones too. It'll be tough to look outside that sandbox that our inner demons try to lay out, But so long as we can even step one foot outside and embrace the sure uncertainty of hope in the future, there is always that possibility for a brighter day, a better tomorrow, something we can look forward to, with all the joy we can possibly muster and all the hope that lingers, however broken, deep in our hearts. If we will only let those who want to help us some room to give us a hand.